tension that has been going on for decades between China, mainland China, as well as Taiwan. And we think that why are we proposing this motion now, right? There are three main reasons why we're proposing this motion now. First of all, historical context, because there is no longer the kind of oppression or the kind of strong negative sentiment that exists between China and Taiwan that is necessary today, and that is why we propose for change. Secondly, economic context, because of the increasing dependence not just of Taiwan, but of most other Northeast Asian countries, or in fact many other countries in the world, on China. We think that it's in fact beneficial for Taiwan to abandon its move towards formal independence. And finally, on political context, because geopolitics in Northeast Asia has changed today, and China has emerged as clearly the greatest player, and we think that it would be advantageous for China as well. So, before I move on to my model, I'm just going to give you an outline of my case. First, I'm going to go more in depth into the dependence of Taiwan on China, before moving on to the geopolitical context of Northeast Asia. And my partner is afterwards going to expand more on the idea of the security dilemma, as well as domestic politics within Taiwan. But before I move on, what's the model we're going to use here? What we're proposing as the government is to use a model that is very similar to when Hong Kong was returned back to China in 1997. Because what happens is that even though Hong Kong is now formally a part of China, it is seen as a special administrative region, which means that for 50 years it's legalized under legislation that nothing will be changed in Hong Kong in terms of legislation, in terms of elections, in terms of financial policy within Hong Kong and so on, which means that effectively, as proposed by the motion, what we're seeing is that how Taiwan is abandoning formal independence in name in terms of not being able to get a seat in the UN, which we don't think is incredibly useful for Taiwan anyway, but it will still be able to remain autonomous in most important areas that are key to Taiwan's interests, such as domestic policies, financial policies, and so on, because as you see in the model like Hong Kong, they managed to retain their own currency, their own customs union and custom policies, taxation policies, and so on. And we propose the same thing for Taiwan, for Taiwan's case. And we think that this will be beneficial because Taiwan will be able to maintain its own distinctive cultural and identity, as well as its key policy areas, yet be able to enjoy the economic and security benefits that will be proposed as a result of this greater rapprochement of China. Before I go,
I think the case of Hong Kong and Taiwan is a bit different because they find themselves their historical identity from different persons. Chinese people find their identity from Mao Zedong, and Taiwanese people find their identity from
yeah, thank you very much. I think that yes, that might be incredibly relevant 50 years ago, but today I think we on the side of the government think that the economic benefits and the political benefits far outweigh the kind of historical background that happens 50 years ago. And if you look at the will of the people today, more people are interested in the kind of benefits that could be enjoyed with this motion. And I'm going to show you later on in my substantive why this is more important than the kind of historical baggage that people who want to forget because they no longer want to remember all these difficult things that have been happening. So first of all, on dependence on China, this comes twofold, right? First, economically as well as politically. I'm going to first go on the economic point. There are three main areas where Taiwan will be able to benefit as a result of a greater rapprochement with China, which would come naturally if independence almost moved towards formal independence, right? Because right now there's so much tension between the two areas, and it's just maybe a few years ago that Chinese people could travel freely to Taiwan. We think that with this move, first of all, in terms of production, right? We know that China is more or less the factory of the world, and Taiwan so far has not been able to benefit from, even though they are right next to China, Taiwan has not been able to benefit from the kind of cost advantage that they could have if they shift production to China. This would not mean like an excessive loss of jobs in Taiwan, right? Because we see that most countries do the same thing and they're working just fine. And so what we see here is that if this motion were to pass, what happens essentially in Taiwan is that they would have a greater cost advantage, greater production advantage as a result of cheaper cost of production, and this would really improve their industries and their production, and this would lead to a greater increase in GDP for Taiwan. And secondly, you also get an access to a bigger market. We know that China is like the most populous country in the world. India's coming after, but the point is that China is right next to Taiwan, and it would be a shame if Taiwan were not to capitalize on such a big comparative advantage. Because right now, other countries such as in Southeast Asia, they are also trying to target a big market such they might fail where Taiwan might succeed simply because of geographical proximity. Because we know that transport cost is an integral part of economics and that it normally accounts for a great cost. And we see that with such close proximity between Taiwan and China, Taiwan should be able to capitalize on that. Finally, on the idea of non-barriers to trade, right? Because right now, like for example, we had a teammate from China who came with us to this tournament. The visa process was horrendous. And if you look at not just the visa process as well as other things such as taxation and so on, if we take away these, if the motion were to pass, what happens is that these barriers to trade will no longer exist or at least be minimized. This means that trade could go on between Taiwan and China much more freely, and we think that that's an excellent thing. Secondly, politically speaking, Taiwan is now incredibly dependent on the US, right? And we see that that might be a negative thing, and we think that it's time for Taiwan to wean off its US backing, and we think that this is extremely important. Furthermore, if you look at the trade ties that Taiwan has, which are very close with places such as Hong Kong and Singapore, which are also incredibly reliant on China. So what happens is that if push comes to shove, if China were to make these places make a choice between China and Taiwan, these places such as Singapore and Hong Kong would choose China and not Taiwan. And what happens is that this means that Taiwan is going to lose a great deal of investment, a great deal of foreign investor backing. Finally, in terms of geopolitical context, which my panel will extend on later, we see that Japan used to be the market leader of Southeast Asia, but it's no longer the case today because China is now indisputably the one. And so this means that with this policy, essentially what we see is that Taiwan will be able to leech onto the strongest banker in Northeast Asia, and we think that that's an extremely good thing, both economically and politically for Taiwan, and for all these reasons, we are very proud to propose this motion.
Now, let's take a look at what the government team has shown you so far. They have told you that Taiwan should abandon all these independence acts because, well, there's a bigger market out there for them, and they can, benefit, and their dependency, that problem can also be solved. Our opposition team sees that these things also have alternatives, and they are simply proposing the same consensus while jeopardizing a national stance that the government has to pursue and respect for the people. That is their main stance, because the reason why the government is there and what a democracy should be are the values that should be respected, and therefore, that is why we're standing upon this podium to oppose to this motion. I asked the leader of opposition to bring upon why this is detrimental harm to democracy, and the deputy leader of opposition will go deeper into the aspects of how it will be detrimental to the people of Taiwan. But before I go on to the constructors, please let me point out a few faults from the former speaker's speech. Well, first of all, let's take a look at her model. We have 3 points of refutation towards this. First of all, she said that this will be very similar to the case of Hong Kong. But first of all, as this POI has already mentioned, you can clearly see the identity and the stance of the very people that were actually made in Taiwan is the very fact that they believe when they came out. They believe that instead of Mao Zedong, they actually believe that Chen Shui-bian, the actual leader, the leader of China. That's why they made their country as the Republic of China in the very first place. They still have that stance that opposes, and that is a very different case from this case of Hong Kong, as we can see. And also, as I'm going to explain to you later on, the case regarding Taiwan and China is also a case between democracy and communism. Although we can see that they will respect their legislation and whatnot, we can clearly see that these two stances are fundamentally different, and they still have open places for a lot of conflict regarding these aspects. And also, seeing the very case of Hong Kong itself, we can clearly see that the Hong Kong case was not so successful as we can see because before the 1990s, before Hong Kong was actually placed into China, there were many articles criticizing China and pointing out its faults. However, as the process continued and as their models somehow succeeded, the articles criticism and pointing out the faults of China have already disappeared. So we can clearly see that this is a situation where the influence of China has actually increased within Hong Kong. Although they say that they respect the legislation and let them do what they want, we clearly see that the influence is still there and that can propose a negative consensus regarding that the fundamental differences still lie between Taiwan and China. And also, her argument regarding a bigger market, she said a bigger market can be open. First of all, we have 2 points of refutation towards this. First of all, we can already have the alternative exporting. The reason that the proposal that they are making is entering a market that can already be that already has an alternative, which is only having the price tag of jeopardizing a nation's stance. The reason why a nation is there, and also having troubles because the nations are fundamentally different regarding them. And also, the second point would be that saying that there is a bigger market, we can clearly see that the benefits are much smaller than the harms that are to follow, because the market regarding China in the global perspective is fundamentally different. It's a fundamentally different stance from Taiwan, because people regarding the Chinese market see it as large quantities and cheap prices. They see it as a large market where products are produced at cheap prices.
Quite so.
Yes, ma'am.
So what if it's large quantities of goods produced at cheap prices?
Yes.
That's what everybody does and everybody buys from China.
Yeah. Because they are cheap and produced in large amounts, people perceive the made in China aspect as a slightly negative consensus. On the other hand, Taiwan produces computer and other computer products and microchips. These products also rely on the aspect of high quality and high prices and less quantity, which is opposing to the economic stance of China itself. So we can see that it's collaborated with the market of China. The stances are very different, so there are many harms that we can see. And also regarding the topic of dependency, the reason why Taiwan was able to dodge the influence of China was because the USA was held to Taiwan in the very first place. But in this case, we are actually opening Taiwan up into China. So let me go to my constructors. My argument will be made in 3 levels of analysis. First of all, what is democracy? Second, what would passing the motion mean? And third, what are the problems that arise? First of all, what is a democracy? We can simply say it is a form of governing people. But we would like to say it is a form of governing people where everybody's opinions are respected, including the minorities and, of course, the majorities. Because, first of all, it is because we need to gather a more stable society where less people feel left out and they feel that they actually have a playing role within their societies. And also, representation of the people can only be made when the ideas of the individuals are actually gathered and the nation can see what the individuals are thinking regarding the situation. Now, the second level of analysis would be, what would passing this motion mean? This motion is harmful because Taiwan is divided into 2 groups: independence and opposing independence. These factors mean that people wanting independence, they're not simply following a blind popular propaganda. They have reasons why they want to become independent. They want to become independent. It's because, first of all, regarding historic regions, as I said before, the reason why Taiwan was in this place is because they believe Chen Shui-bian is the actual leader of China, and they do not accept certain norms of China. And also, there are also practical reasons because their political structure is fundamentally different, as I explained to you before, regarding the difference between democracy and communism. And also, there are many different stances regarding the national society, because China does not actually accept Taiwan as a legitimate nation in the very first place. And so what this means that people have their very reasons why they are opposing to this and why they want to become independent regarding this very first place. And we can clearly see that there are not a minority, and that is quite a large portion of the population within the society. And as a democracy, the government has an obligation to speak to that these people's opinions are actually reflected within the national consensus. But passing this motion, according to the government, would be ignoring the very reason of democracy and the people that we can see. So the problem to analyze is very simple. It's not fully represent the people and ignores the way the people are there, and ignores the national consensus, and ignores the reason why the country is made in the very first place. So seeing to this, we can clearly say that there are many harms following this motion, and that's the reason why we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
speech, and now invite the second speaker from the government, the Deputy Prime Minister.
Without the backing of active United States participation in the independence of Taiwanese movement, and without the strong consensus between Taiwanese people, we're very concerned about what the opposition is proposing for formal independence, and we don't understand how this practically will work in the future, or will come into force and will work fine. We don't think any kind of explanation was done by the leader of opposition. But before I move on to my 3 points in this debate, let me move on to a few rebuttals from the leader of the opposition. And first he said, well, because Taiwanese and Hong Kong have defined different routes in the history, that Taiwanese should have formal independence. Mrs. Chair, my Prime Minister already told you that in the current status quo, people don't really care about what kind of historical routes they find. They have a strong sentiment in the past, Mr. Chair, but this sentiment has changed over time in 50 years, and we think that this is a new context that we have right now. And this answers the questions why now they have to defy the formal independence. But the second thing they told you, well, there are fundamental differences because there are democracy and there are differences between democracy and communism. Mr. Chair, this is exactly the context. The tension between the democratic nation and a communist nation was where a question from a Chinese government to Taiwanese government came from. But this kind of rhetoric has been gradually watering away as time overlaps, and therefore we don't see oppression in today's society towards Taiwanese people. And this is why, Mr. Chair, we think that this kind of informal independence is not really peaceful. But the third thing he told you was that, well, Hong Kong was not successful. Mr. Chair, we firstly think that our practical benefits which Hong Kongese have right now, for example, as my partner told you, like the legislation and independent currency and those kinds of free trade agreements they can do with their autonomy, but also we think that there are practically more democracy in Hong Kong right now as they want in before, right? Because we think that this is a successful model which the Taiwanese government should have been targeting as long before. But the second thing he told you was that, well, there are alternatives when Taiwan doesn't really trade with China. We say we have two responses to this. Firstly, we think that China, given a very strong economic power in the international society, have strong power in retaliating those kind of Taiwanese government once they have this kind of formal independence. They can also threat other countries to not have trades with Taiwan if they want to, as we can see the formal retaliatory measures done by China. We think that this is very detrimental to Taiwan. The second thing, they told you about computer chips and Chinese market won't be very useful for Taiwan. No, thank you. Those kind of computer chips are the ones that Taiwanese should have access to Chinese market even more without barriers to trade, Mr. Chair, because China has rare earth materials. They're mostly sole producer of those kinds of materials, and also the biggest producer, right? They have these kinds of rare earth materials that use the computer chips, which Taiwan greatly depends on. And we think that this is another reason why they should have not formal independence and gain the model of Hong Kong. But another thing they told you, well, most people in Taiwan want have a national consensus in promoting this kind of formal independence. This is wrong, Mr. Chair. As we can see in Taiwanese sentiment, the very sentiment is that only a small population is concerned about this issue, and most of the majority of the population is still politically apathetic to this issue. So the idea of only taking consideration into small population's opinion and forcing this kind of opinion towards the government to have this kind of form of independence is very wrong, because it sacrifices the will of the majority who doesn't really know about the issue right now. So we don't think that this kind of form of independence is the move that we have to retract right now. No, thank you. Now moving on to my first point on how this is harming the security dilemma of the region. That in the status quo, Mr. Chair, we think that there are very strong tensions between the countries inside Northeast Asian region. Why? Because in the status quo, there are military power security dilemma between the nations. Because the United States has its armed military bases in South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, and this strengthens the tensions between the nations. And if we gain formal independence for Taiwan, it means that the stronger military power Taiwanese might get in the future, Mr. Chair, because they can develop their own weapons without the scrutiny of Chinese government. And we think that this kind of security dilemma strengthens the rhetoric of Chinese government and Chinese extremist or right-wing movements to actually go against minorities inside China and also Taiwan in the future. But another argument when there is clear harm, done to Taiwanese people, we have 2 points of analysis. Firstly, we think that it is strengthening the nationalist sentiment of the general public, because they right now have a strong notion of one China policy, right? That is why they have these kinds of efforts to integrate minorities inside their own societies. And we think that furthermore, we have seen in Chinese government the extreme right-wing views promoted in Chinese government. We think that if this kind of form of independence is to be proposed and pass today's debate, we think that these kinds of strong nationalist sentiment will be even stronger inside China. But the third thing we want to tell you about, Mrs. Chair, is about how you gain state sovereignty. We think that this kinds of arbitrary succession movement from Chinese government shows a very bad precedent towards other nations in the future. Because right now, Mr. Chair, the only case with International Court of Justice agreed on gaining new state sovereignty for other nations was when there was oppression. But in Taiwanese cases, in today, Mr. Chair, we don't see any oppression. We think that this kind of arbitrary line drawing in today's case is not really something of a good precedent which other international society wants to build. Because there are other independence movements in other nations, such as Kurds in Turkey and Syria, such as Quebec in Canada. We don't have the necessary principle and practicality in gaining all kinds of succession movements, state sovereignty into international society. And furthermore, Mr. Chair, and the last point of my speech is that how Taiwanese people won't like this kind of policy once the economic and political benefits are annulled because they gain formal independence, because China can have retaliatory measures. We're very proud to
Right. Thank you, Speaker, for the speech, and invite second speaker of
Mr. Speaker, honorable members of the Parliament, and ladies and gentlemen, there's a country called People's Republic of China, and there's a country called Vietnam Republic of China. And there's a reason behind why people call it differently, by claiming peoples or not. Then just like Korea, I'm from the Republic of Korea, and the people on the north side of the Korean Peninsula live in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So we think there's clearly some kind of different identity, historical identity behind this, even in the names of the country. And even in the basic standard of the basic stance like that we think that abandoning all moves toward the former independence is just like the abandoning what people think, even though Taiwan is a democratic government. So, behind this stenciled line, we think that it's not a good chance, it's not a good thing to abandon all moves toward the former independence of Taiwanese government. Well, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we think, before I move on to my argument, why in many aspects, this actually abandons the Taiwanese people as just like the irresponsible government. Let me please make some proposals about this kind of tension argument that DPP Prime Minister called. She talked about the tension is being caused because it raises the nationalist sentiment of the China and Taiwan. Well, we think that, so what's so problematic about people trying to fight for independence, even causing some tension in general? Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of people fight for independence nowadays, a lot of ethnic minorities, but if you take a look at Chechnya in Russia, they also fight for independence, even though the Russian government was never allowed to. And a lot of Kurd people in Turkey, Iraq also fight for independence. And nobody criticizes them just because they are causing, ladies and gentlemen, tension within Germany. We think some kind of perspective, different view or perspective just make them criticize for this. But just because they cause some tension, we cannot criticize some people just because they fight for their independence, they fight for their historical identity. We should be elaborate further in my argument. Yes, ma'am.
We're not criticizing the people, we're simply saying that it would be more beneficial for the Taiwanese as well as the region for Taiwan to abandon this former independence.
That's what both of us argue for, that there are more benefits that overweigh the harm. Well, we'll say to you in my argument that plus to his argument, the liberal argument, that actually harms are bigger than the benefits because this didn't help. So first of all, why abandon Taiwanese people in the first of historical aspect? This has been already debated for a long time. We need 2 debaters and 3 debaters. But ladies and gentlemen, so in historically, just the fundamental basis of the fundamental root of Taiwan and China is different. When you go to the Taiwanese history teacher's lesson, you can see that Taiwanese history teachers teach you that the fundamental root of the Taiwanese government and Taiwanese nationality is from Chen Shui-bian, who fought against Mao Zedong, and Mao Zedong established the People's Republic of China in general. So we think that what they say is that what they say to Taiwanese people is to become one nation to the people who their ancestors fought against in general. I mean, my ancestor fought against the Chinese government, and now do I have to become one? Do I have to become a civilian to the nation in general once an enemy? So we think that the historical identity, what Taiwanese government has taught to the Taiwanese children and Taiwanese people, is just completely different from what now they are trying to pursue. So we think that the historical identity, which is very important, that you identify yourself, is becoming confused. You confuse others, and we think that that's a great problem for the Taiwanese people in general. So we think that this kind of thing cannot be done. Ladies and gentlemen, in the paper bill of People's Republic of China, the face of Mao Zedong is drawn. And we think that itself is completely shown how the historical identity is completely different between the two nations. And we don't think that just because ignoring that, only the response they came up was that, oh, there are more benefits than that. Just because of that, we don't think that you can just abandon the historical identity of some people. Because it's just something that you identify yourself with, and we think it's a nation's duty to protect the national identity. And secondly, we think the government system's political thing. A political thing is completely different. Because they came up with an example of Hong Kong. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they characterize Hong Kong case just like that. Freedom is king, legislation is just there, and now a lot of systems are kept in Hong Kong. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation is completely different after the Hong Kong got implemented into the People's Republic of China. Because, as our leader already told you about articles, how the criticism has decreased seriously, and about the case, and also the fundamental democratic and autocratic system that the People's Republic of China has is completely different. Even though maybe Taiwan can keep itself system, but the situation would be completely different. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of publishing, which the democratic government guarantees for you in Taiwan, will be completely suppressed by the Chinese government. Because, even though China can say that, oh, I will keep your system, but because China will intervene into the system of Taiwanese government, even though a little bit, well, it's impossible now because Taiwan has an independent And Taiwanese people have lived over 50 years in a democratic nation, ladies and gentlemen. Why the situation has to be suddenly changed and confuse these people, ladies and gentlemen? We think that this is a very action of the irresponsible government. Now let me move. So we think that this political difference is also another reason for not to abandon all moves to our former independence. Because abandoning all moves to our former independence is just like accepting that now it's ready to get assimilated into Taiwan and China. Now, about the economical aspect, we think that economical benefits do not exist, but there are only economical harms. Because, ladies and gentlemen, Taiwan, as a Korean, I know as Taiwan, I know a lot of companies, I don't remember the name, but I know a company, a very good Taiwanese company that produces good motherboards for computer, good computer chips, and I have quite positive image about Taiwan because of the brain power, because of the power. But if it gets assimilated to China, because China does not have that kind of popular company or brain power, we think that the image of the Taiwan will be changed into that kind of image of China. And we think that causes a more negative aspect for Taiwanese people and Taiwanese economy, because Taiwanese brain is lowered a lot. And so we think that the economical benefits do not exist, but we think that more harm will be done with the economic aspect of the Taiwan. And another is that what people think, ladies and gentlemen. We think a lot of Chinese government, China is composed of a lot of ethnicities and a lot of people, diverse people. And we think that Taiwan, because it has been independent for 50 years, over 50 years, we think that Taiwan, what people think about Taiwan is also the problem between China and Taiwan. Because of this reason, we're very comfortable. Thank you.
Right, I thank the speaker for his speech, and now I invite the first speaker for closing comments, and then
Mr. Speaker, we believe that the question that we should be asking today is whether is Taiwan ready to be on its own? Will it be okay? Will Taiwan be okay? Will it be strong, stable, and safe after if the proposal passes through and Taiwan becomes an independent country, right? And on the side government, we believe that that is not the case. We believe that once Taiwan becomes an independent country, it will do Taiwan more harm than good. So our unique extension we have two unique extensions from psychology. The first one is how it would affect the economic relations between China and Taiwan itself, and secondly, how it would actually affect the defense system of Taiwan as we see it today, right? But before that, let me move on to some developments. The second speaker from the opening of the session, he was going on and on about how it's important for the nation to know its historical basis, and it's because of these historical issues, right? Taiwan should gain independence and totally break off ties with China. But we believe that there's a reason why history is history and it's meant to stay in the past. Of course, we recognize that you should know about this history. But the thing is, Mr. Speaker, we are moving on, we are moving forward. Why are they trying to bring these negative sentiments from the past into the present and make things worse between make the relations between China and Taiwan worse? We believe what they are doing is aggravating the harms, aggravating the tension between China and Taiwan, right? And we really believe, on side closing, we really believe that what these Taiwanese people, what the function of history is to learn from them and not to sit down. actually produces computer monitors, and they're actually the leaders of manufacturers in the personal computer industry. And the thing that we should really highlight on here is that the end products of Taiwan's exports mostly are finished up in China. So if let's say Taiwan forces its way out of China, we believe they would enter China, and this would greatly affect their their exports, because they will not be able to sit up. They will not be able to actually produce these goods to actually to be exported, and that we believe will actually greatly affect the economy of Taiwan. And on the second level, right? On the second level, we can see that the biggest importer and exporter of Taiwan is actually China itself. So in 2010, we have seen that China actually accounts for 41.8% of Taiwan's exports. 41.8% is basically the whole, it's a huge chunk out of Taiwan's economy. So we believe that once if they push for this independence, they will really greatly anger China, right? And it will cause a great damage to the economy of China. Because we can see that Taiwan's economy basically surrounds these exports, and we believe that the fracture of these relations between these two countries will further aggravate the economic situation that we see today. Yes, okay.
Taiwanese government is exporting and importing its products from China. So what's so problematic about this?
The thing is, okay, yeah, exactly right. Because now the export and import relation is between Taiwan and China. So if let's say China gets angry, China will not give anything to Taiwan, and Taiwan's economy, export economy will just greatly be affected. And on the next level, right, we can also see that the United States is the third largest trade partner in Taiwan. So we believe that now there's a delicate link between China and US, because China is actually holding US as land. So if let's say they are separate, right, and they are forced to choose between China and Taiwan, obviously the US would carry out their policies in China's interest, because they want to protect our economy. And on the second level of defense, right, one of the biggest questions that we have to ask when a country is pushing for independence is whether this country is able to protect itself in terms of internal and external security, right? And we believe that now itself, Taiwan and China relations are being more and more. Taiwan is actually facing a challenge of acquiring foreign military expenses because of the stronger Chinese opposition, right? And on the second level, we must see that most of the weapons that Taiwan gets, that most of the bulk of Taiwan usually buy, most of Taiwan's weapons actually come from the United States. So once again, we analyze that the relationship between China and US now is very fragile. It's very China and US is very interrelated. So if let's say Taiwan pushes for this independence, later on they want to get these weapons from the United States. We believe the United States would actually side China and not supply weapons to Taiwan. So this would be a very dangerous situation for Taiwan, because it would be a new country. It's volatile. It is very vulnerable to the outside conditions. And without this ability to arm themselves, to equip themselves to protect Taiwan itself, we believe that it is going against the very idea of why have a country when you can't go protect yourself. So basically what I'm showing you, Mr. Speaker, is how it affects the relationship, the economic relations between China and Taiwan itself, and second about how Taiwan is not ready because they will not be able to arm themselves. With that, I'm very proud to propose.
Right here, let me speak about her speech, and now we invite the first speaker to closing.
absolute value. We believe it's a fundamental value that every country should possess, anyone, every place, every region should possess. And that underlying principle of independence and this right to sovereign state is what we're going to extend as a second government. Before moving on to our two extensions, firstly about why sovereign right is a fundamental right, not a relative right. And two, how this proposal is going to further oppress people in China in the long run. I'm going to give you 5 month rebuttals to the oil pair case. Firstly, they talk about the issue of harm for Taiwan because they're unable to no longer trade with China. One, already under the status quo, there can be an economic trade between China and Taiwan, even in most cases, right? For example, in 2007, Taiwan and China already explicitly agreed with the gradual decreasing of tariffs. So even if you want to export or import now, there's nothing really new from the closing. It can still be done in both paradigms. It's not unique harm. Two, we need China and Taiwan. The closing tries to come up with this idea Taiwan is not ready. Taiwan is obviously ready. It's categorized as 4 Asian tigers, which is one of the most prominent economic prosperity. Moreover, GDP of Taiwan is increasing 8% daily for decades, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think that Taiwan is not ready. It's a false analysis of the status quo. You see reading the news. Third, so we don't think their analysis even stands. And we believe since third of all is Taiwan can simply trade with other countries, which is necessary, right? Why do you have so uniqueness and only stay with China, right? Again, there's Japan, Singapore, or Malaysia, or other countries they want to trade. It's up to the country to decide. I don't know what they're trying to talk about. Thank you. Second, they talk about visa. One, but we can still guarantee certain economic ties through free trade agreement, or for example, ECFA, which has been signed recently between Taiwan and China. There should be a faster process there, such as how we see case of Japan and the United States. Two, the designing visa itself is our own sovereign rights. I don't know what you're trying to explain. Third of all, they try to say national sentiment is going to be further stronger. One, that's national sentiment, whatever, is already strong under the current paradigms. I don't know what you're trying to defend between the status quo and aftermath. There's so little difference there. Fourth refutation, there's no, the criteria is of independence where there's no oppression. I don't know what they're talking about, right? That every country has a right to pursue independence when necessary. No, thank you. That's what they try to say, that there's Taiwan's arms will decrease, that Taiwan's not ready to arm itself. One, the United States has strong incentive to back up Taiwan even after taking this proposal, right? It can be selling arms for decades. Two, Taiwan itself used $8.042 billion of army already under the current paradigm. Taiwan can already self-sufficient. Two, India using 6.6 million people conscription already under the current paradigm. So Taiwan is absolutely ready. So for extension of how having pursuing sovereign right is a fundamental one. But the opening document did a good job explaining how Taiwan has a different history and ideology. We see further of 3 reasons. Firstly, we see the right to sovereign right is fundamental because you're able to decide what policies to take in the future, right? Because your future or your son's or daughter's future can be determined by China. That's ridiculous, right? So since Taiwanese people are the ones who will be most affected and the ones the ones who will be most influenced. So for example, who do you have economic tie with, or who do you have diplomatic tie, especially considering the fact these things are long-term things. We believe that Taiwanese people should have the right to choose who to actually have a trade with. No, thank you. Second, we believe there's a democratic process behind supporting Taiwanese independence, right? Opening all government set of false analysis, saying only small segment of society believes in Taiwan independence. False, ladies and gentlemen. In 1996, Li Kanghui, who is the president of Taiwan, explicitly said we want the independence of Taiwan. There's also, secondly, in recently, there's more demonstrations being done on the streets of Taiwan seeking for independence. More than the majority of people already agrees with independence, right? So according to their logic, that if there's, as long as there's national consensus, we can have independence, then they lost their case, right? Because there is a national consensus there. The part why this election has been successful for this president, it's because majority of people agree with independence of Taiwan. So since citizens are the ones who most along, that there has to be democratic process of diet or elections or demonstration. I don't think that China can simply undermine the democratic process there. Third reason, we see this is people are being oppressed daily, where the police is taking them away in the night. We believe that this is simply harmful. If we allow China, we integrate China and Taiwan by oppressing China, China can legitimize its one China policy even further. That legitimacy can be used to further oppress people in Tibet or further oppress people in Uyghur. And they can say, since we allow for Taiwan, this precedent can be a strong reason to justify further oppressions and further integration. We see this is in one step back. All of the effort we have been trying to liberalize these societies, such as awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to Liu Xiaobo and trying to support Dalai Lama. We don't think it's going to set back all those movements. These people have a higher and harder way to have a grand sovereign state or to have even autonomy. Considering the fact that China has invaded Tibet and Uyghur in 1950s, we think that can be further legitimized if we take this proposal, right? Obviously, because they're now trying to invade Taiwan in a sense and make it part again. Even though Tibet and Uyghur have different ethnicity, different religion, such as for Tibet Buddhism, which is different from China, they're going to legitimize the further integration or oppression. We think this is rather harmful. So we brought you on the table why sovereign right is a fundamental one. We told you Taiwan is ready. We told you Taiwan has the right. We believe Taiwan is ready for independence. That's why we oppose.
Right, thanks speaker for the speech and invite the last speaker in government next.
Mr. Speaker, I found this as a very interesting debate in terms of the relations between China and Taiwan, which is actually quite a very sort of confusing gray area for a lot of people, Mr. Speaker. And in this debate, I've identified three main clashes in terms of how it benefits the Taiwanese people, whether they should be independent or not independent officially from China, in terms of democracy and what is democracy. We got a very elaborate explanation from the opposition side of what democracy is, and also how this helps Taiwan economically, militarily, in terms of how they defend themselves, Mr. Speaker. And these are the clashes that I identified in this debate. But before I move into these clashes, I'd like to go on to my rebuttals first. The speaker before me came and said a lot of things about how the GDP of Taiwan has been growing, how the ECFA is such a beneficial thing to Taiwan, and we completely agree with that, Mr. Speaker, on side government, that this ECFA between Taiwan and China is beneficial to China and to Taiwan indeed, and the main reason why, please sit down, and the main reason why the ECFA has been able to be put in place is because of the ties between Taiwan and China, because of the status quo that is in place right now. That is why it's been because basically the ECFA is just to eventually create free trade between Taiwan and China, to reduce the red tape of cutting through, of which you have to navigate your way through, because with two separate states, it becomes more, with Taiwan becoming independent, it becomes more difficult for Taiwan to trade with China. You also talked about undermining the democratic process. Opening government came up and told us that Taiwan will be able to have its own administrative policies, legislation, elections, financial policies, domestic policies, in terms of what we see happening in Hong Kong now, along the same lines of the model in Hong Kong, and opening opposition came up and told us that Hong Kong isn't doing well. Mr. Speaker, Hong Kong is doing very well. That's the reason why the Hang Seng is one of the strongest stock markets in the Speaker, they also came with the long-term implications and he kept on giving the example of Tibet and oppression. Mr. Speaker, as soon as I landed in Taiwan, everything looked great. I don't see people oppressed. So I feel he's taking that example out of context and also comparing it to Russia and Chechnya. We can't deal with those examples right now, Mr. Speaker, because those things are out of context. The Taiwanese people are doing great, and that is why you can see with the GDP increasing and exports increasing and the like. Before I move on to my clashes, closing.
Okay, how is long-term implication relevant when your proposal legitimizes and makes a precedent of oppression?
We are not legitimizing oppression. As we said, Taiwan is able to have its own political parties, financial policy. Taiwan is able to just officially carry the banner of them being under China, but in a sense, Taiwan is able to operate in any way. The reason why we want Taiwan to remain under China is to be able to ease these things of trading between the two, Mr. Speaker. My question is, Mr. Speaker, how this benefits the Taiwanese people economically, how it benefits the Chinese people economically, and how how it benefits these two countries as a whole. Mr. Speaker, both opening government and closing government have talked about how Taiwan is able to access the Chinese economy, which is the most populous country in the world. How they have access to the largest market. They have that ease. Not a lot of countries would kill to have the opportunity to be able to have free trade with China, Mr. Speaker. China is such a powerful economy, Mr. Speaker, that they hold 80% of the United States debt, Mr. Speaker. 80% of the world's largest economy. As my extension speaker came up and told us that having a vested interest, Taiwan being one of the largest investors in China, and China being the largest investor in the United States, ties these countries together. So basically what we have here, Mr. Speaker, is a situation of Taiwan having access to the world's two largest economies because these countries are interrelated. They have this very, very good, very healthy trading relationship, Mr. Speaker. So, on to democracy and what is democracy, Mr. Speaker. Democracy is, we all know that democracy is a majority game. Basically, the numbers rule, Mr. Speaker. So what government is saying is that Taiwan having, as mentioned by opening gov, which was not addressed by closing gov, Taiwan having its own elections and political parties and financial policies, the people still get to choose who they want to lead them. They are distinguished nations in terms of how their systems operate, how their political systems run, and democracy is not being infringed in this way, Mr. Speaker. My extension speaker also came up and told us about how militarily Taiwan benefits from being tied to China in terms of the fear